and thank you for listening to this week's Thought of the Week. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy, and I'm part of the youth at the Church of Good Shepherd. When Mark asked me to do this talk, the first verse that came to mind was Jeremiah 29:11. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declared the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." For those of you that know me, you'll know that I like to plan, and I like to know when things are going to change. For me, one of the hardest things about this year has been the sudden and constant change, as well as the inability to be able to plan in advance. Not knowing when we're going to get out, and therefore not knowing what we can do. But throughout this year, this verse has given me a much needed sense of comfort and release as I've discovered it in a new way. God is in control. When I used to read this verse, I would get comfort out of it because I read it as God would instantly stop all my troubles because he didn't want to harm me. I saw hope as an end to whatever pain I was feeling at the time, and I saw it instant. But I've since discovered that that's not quite the message of the verse, and yet it's still a verse that can bring so many people so much comfort. It's also worth looking at what is God's plan, and whilst we can never understand or know exactly how it is, this is how I like to think of it. I believe it isn't a step-by-step process, or it's not as simple as today Amy will do this, or this week she'll do that, or even what we'll do in a year. Because we do have free will, given to us as a gift from God, so our lives can't be completely predetermined. However, his plan is an end goal where his promises come true, where we prosper, come to no harm, and have hope because we're living our future with God. But we are unable to truly achieve that until we get to heaven, and we can only do that through Jesus. I used to explain it like this. God's plan is a straight road with many exits and entrances. We may miss the sign on our sat-nav to carry straight on, but there's always a way where we can get back on track, back on the path of salvation to the destination of God's plan. And that is just how I view it. Like I said, we can never know that. We don't know. God's plan could be step by step, but that's how I like to look at it. But the fundamental message of it all is that God does have a plan for us. For each of us, he has it for us individually, for our parish of Wisley with Perford, and for the church as a whole. But more often than not, his plan is very different than what we expected. An example of this is exactly the passage that this verse is taken from. God was addressing the Israelites who were enslaved and away from their home. God's plan for the Israelites he talks of was not for them to go home, away from the suffering. His plan was for them to stay put for a while, where they were suffering. He wanted them to prosper and to help the nation that enslaved them thrive. And that's far from what they wanted to hear. And this shows that this verse isn't always a promise that our suffering will end right there and then. The plan isn't always going to seem a good thing at the time to us. It's not a promise we will flourish in a perfect life every day, but it's a promise that is so much more amazing than that. A promise which can bring comfort to your everyday life. It's a promise that God is in control and that we can thrive in the knowledge of that and in his love, despite the ways of the earth. His plans are for us to prosper. And sometimes the best growth comes from persevering through a trial rather than escaping the situation. Recently, I had to choose where I wanted to go for my sixth form next year. And anyone who knows me knows I have changed my mind more times in the last 2 years than probably my whole life combined. I may be exaggerating a bit there, but I think you get the point. And I left it right up until the last possible week I could. I clung to this verse during this time and I begged for a sign because I was thinking that God knew where he wanted me to go and that it would affect, and if I went to the wrong place, it would affect everything. And maybe he did have a place where he wanted me to go. But I didn't get that sign and I felt downhearted. But then I realised this verse isn't talking about where I'm going to go next year. It's not talking about what I'm going to do tomorrow. It's so much more than that. It's more than just the hope that God can help us make a decision. It shows the hope of the kingdom of God, our future home. It shows how it's been fulfilled in the gospel and in the return of Jesus. The promise of Jeremiah 29:11 is so much bigger than me needing to make up my indecisive mind. It's so much bigger than my need to know what's going on. It's a promise that we will be reunited with our Father. And that is God's plan. And He's never broken a promise yet. But to truly benefit of this plan, we need to let go of our expectations of what we might hope His plan is. And we need to realise that our lives are not in our hands. They're in the hands of the same God who created the world. It's not our plan, it's His. We're not in control, He is. Our faith is not our will, but instead it's His will and His way, like Jesus said on the cross, not my will, but yours. So when you need comfort, cling to this verse. But don't cling to the false hope that God will instantly remove your suffering. Instead, cling to the very true gospel truth that despite our suffering, despite anything we're going to, God will help us persevere, He will help us to thrive, and most importantly, He will give us hope. Thank you and have a good week.